Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Coming up, the US rewrites a proposed minerals deal with Ukraine as President Volodymyr Zelensky suggests a final agreement is still some way off. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. JD Vance arrives in Greenland despite backlash over his planned visit. Are Beijing and Brussels getting closer amid transatlantic tension? And a blow to America's slash and burn of global aid. Washington is pushing for a more expansive minerals deal with Ukraine, demanding extra income and first access to the country's natural resources. President Trump this week promised the two countries would put pen to paper very soon, while Ukraine maintains it's open to discussions. Paweł Trzaskowski reports.
The talks for finalising a minerals deal are back. This time, however, in a revised version. A draft of the new deal, which was to give the US access to Ukrainian rare earth minerals in return for military help and security guarantees, was leaked by Bloomberg and, according to some experts, it puts Kiev in a very unfavourable position.
It's a heist.
And that's because the new version of the deal is to give the US more profit from accessing the deposits, as well as the right of first offer on investments in infrastructure and natural resources projects in Ukraine. A high bid, but not uncommon for Donald Trump's transactional way of doing politics.
So I'm afraid I think President Trump thinks in a very different way. He's not interested in realpolitik. He's interested in carving up things.
Preserve, protect and defend.
Something he made very clear even during his first speech as US president.
We will drill, baby, drill.
The announced national energy emergency meant not only re-embracing fossil fuels, but also expanding abroad.
As you know, we're also signing agreements in various locations to unlock rare earths and minerals.
Trump has already signaled interest in potential mineral acquisition in countries like Greenland, Canada or Russia. However, so far, it's been a deal with Ukraine that was the closest to being finalized. But then this happened.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now.
The infamous Oval Office spat threw the minerals deal out of the window. It was brought back after Ukraine took a more conciliatory approach to the US, but on new terms.
It is an entirely different document. There are many things that were not discussed and also some things that, let's say, the parties had already rejected. I don't want to raise a wave. I really want us to get a specific review by lawyers at the highest level.
And such a deal, if signed, could become an obstacle for Ukraine in joining the EU. A 1-2 punch against Kiev.
The reason that this deal is controversial is that if Kyiv signs the proposal and adheres to Washington's demands, it could contravene against the rules of the single market. This is because it would give American companies preference when it comes to those mineral extractions.
Something that Brussels is already reluctantly admitting.
But the line has been conveyed that such an agreement would need to be looked into from the perspective of the relations between Ukraine and the EU, and notably in terms of the accession negotiations.
And Kiev follows.
We can't accept anything that threatens Ukraine's EU integration.
Earlier this week, Donald Trump said the minerals deal was to be signed very soon. On Friday, Volodymyr Zelensky announced Ukraine received its revised version, but with more details emerging, it seems that its finalization is still a distant perspective. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
And while Donald Trump navigates Ukraine, his Vice President JD Vance has touched down in Greenland to visit the Arctic island's American airbase. But it's a largely scaled-down trip after news of the visit prompted backlash from local residents and politicians alike. Sonia Agata-Bischan explains.
Plans change. That was the case with the United States delegation's visit to Greenland. Vice President JD Vance eventually touched down on the Arctic island on Friday to visit the US's military base there. Initially, the trip was framed as a visit to witness a dog sled race in Sisimiut and get to know Greenlandic heritage. But scratch that, because contrary to President Donald Trump's belief,
but we've been invited, and they really like the idea.
Officially, they have not been invited, and officially, the mayor of Sisimiut in the middle of Greenland has said no to meeting with them.
But it wasn't just the Sisimiut mayor. The outgoing prime minister and his caretaker government also refused to meet with the U.S. delegation in Denmark's semi-autonomous island. More than that, he said the visit could in no way be characterized as harmless. Trump's repeated statements like this one could perhaps explain why.
I think we'll go as far as we have to go. We need Greenland, and the world needs us to have Greenland, including Denmark.
But if you ask the Danish prime minister,
Greenland belongs to the Greenlandic people, and Greenland is a part of Danish kingdom, and that is not going to change.
The trip thus changed its shape due to sharp criticism by Greenlanders, particularly in the context of the recent parliamentary elections and negotiations to form a government.
Well, JD Vance is landing on a facility that is theirs. I think that this whole situation of visiting when there is no sitting government, that is not showing respect for an ally.
And on the very same day, Greenland formed its new coalition government consisting of 4 out of 5 parties, with Nalarak, which favors a quicker move to independence unlike the others, being the only opposition.
What it conveys and signals is that the aggressive rhetoric of Trump and the ill-timed visit of the Vances has not divided Greenlanders. It has brought them together.
More recently, Russian President Vladimir Putin also reflected on the future of the Arctic island, saying that the matter concerns 2 specific states and has nothing to do with Russia.
It would be surprising if Russia were not interested in Greenland, because if they want their submarines with nukes on board to go from Murmansk and in the direction of the United States, they will have to pass Greenland.
Greenland's position and the prospect of using the currently ice-jammed Northern Sea route, which makes the journey from Asia to Europe up to 40% shorter than through the Suez Canal, seem to make it an attractive target.
This is so far only a distant prospect. Ice is melting, yes, climate changes are happening, but there is no way we can have a substantial trade route in the first couple of years.
Following the parliamentary elections on March 11th, the winning Democratic Party had 45 days to form a government. Amid foreign interests, it took less than 3 weeks to do that. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
As Europe looks towards America with growing uncertainty, could China be waiting in the wings? In recent days, Beijing has played host to the EU Trade Commissioner, the foreign ministers of Portugal and France and top CEOs. Some analysts say China wants to capitalise on the growing transatlantic rift. Kazimierz Słyszak has more.
In the Philippines, U.S. Defense Secretary made clear on Friday who the Donald Trump administration sees as one of its biggest threats.
It reflects the strength, as I said, of our ironclad alliance, particularly in the face of communist China's aggression in the region.
And while the U.S. was announcing more troops in the Indo-Pacific, Beijing was making moves of its own. It invited several EU officials, including French and Portuguese foreign ministers. The EU trade chief, Maroš Šefčovič, has been the guest of his Chinese counterpart, Vice Premier Ho Laifong.
We have mutual interest in addressing our bilateral and global issues, as well as our differences. The quality of EU-Chinese cooperation impacts our industries, but also the global economy.
These global issues include US tariffs, as President Donald Trump continues to escalate the so-called trade war. In the latest move on Wednesday, he announced 25% tariffs on all car imports to the United States. TVP World asked the Polish Deputy Minister of Economic Development how these tariffs would impact Poland and the entire EU.
Polish economy is more diversified than some of our regional partners, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, few others. But it will be impactful. It will be impactful because we have frankly not seen such high tariffs, well, ever before on automotive industry.
On Friday, China's autocratic leader Xi Jinping met with foreign CEOs of the biggest global companies.
I would like to reiterate that China is firmly committed to advancing reform and opening up. The door will only open wider and wider.
According to political analysts, China is aiming to use the latest rift in the EU-US relations to gain Europe's favor.
So China is definitely trying to exploit that, but at the same time, China is acting in a very hostile manner against the Europeans. European Commission has launched multiple trade defense investigations, so essentially looking at how unfairly China is trying to flood the European market.
Unofficial media reports have pointed to China considering joining Europe's Coalition of the Willing, an initiative led by France and the UK to put troops on the ground in Ukraine to ensure the stability of a future ceasefire. But experts are mostly skeptical of China joining the coalition.
I think it's very naive that it would actually work, because essentially China has been fueling the war by supporting Russia in a material sense.
China is really thinking about excluding European forces in order to assure the peace in Ukraine or giving security guarantee in Ukraine.
While China is the EU's third largest trading partner, imports and exports between the two fell from 2023 to 2024. The United States and the United Kingdom remain the Union's biggest partners, despite the tariffs from President Trump. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łyczak.
Donald Trump's crusade against America's global aid efforts has been dealt a major blow, with funding temporarily reinstated for a research project gathering evidence on Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. A federal court has also ruled that cash for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty must remain in place for now. Susanna Jurek has more.
The Trump administration submitted to mounting pressure this week as it rescinded funding cuts for a period of 6 weeks to continue research carried out by the Yale-led Conflict Observatory Initiative.
They are one of the main bodies tracking the deportations of Ukrainian children to Russian-occupied territory or to Russia itself.
This research is vital not only because of its moral implications, but also considering the scale of the problem.
It's thousands of Ukrainian children who disappeared from new occupied territories, Donbass, Crimea. It's only official number 20,000.
The Trump administration's initial directive also prohibited this organization from transmitting the evidence to prosecutors pursuing criminal cases, namely the International Criminal Court's indictment of Russian President Vladimir Putin.
They have imposed Russian citizenship and the Russian school curriculum. They've prioritized military patriotic training at school and in youth groups, exposing children to war propaganda. These changes violate international humanitarian law, which obliges the occupying power to protect children, respect their national identity.
The 6-week funding extension will allow researchers to transfer evidence relating to the suspected crimes to the European Union's law enforcement agency, Europol. This comes just a day after the Trump administration was dealt a blow when a federal judge barred it from moving ahead with plans to cut off all federal funds to Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. When first announced, Trump's order raised alarm bells for journalists working for independent media outlets.
RFRL does a crucial work in areas that for people who live there that have no access to any other information whatsoever. The only alternative for them is Russian propaganda.
At the same time, criticism of Trump's decision reverberated amongst European policymakers who were faced with the challenge of keeping the organizations afloat.
It has been a beacon of democracy and very valuable in this regard. The question for us is, can we come in with our funding to leave or fill the void that U.S. is leaving? The answer to that question is that not automatically.
Importantly, the reversal of the order to cut funding underlines the challenges that the U.S. president faces domestically.
District Court judge found that the Trump administration's order to eliminate RFE and Radio Liberty immediately did not follow due process, so it was not legally valid. Rather than fighting that ruling, rather than appealing it and going up the chain, the Trump administration has relented, which means that the two services will be funded through September.
For now, the Trump administration's scope to impact funding of these programs has been postponed till early autumn, when Congress will deliberate funding extensions. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Poland says it has no current plans to use the EU's cohesion funds for defence. That's in sharp contrast to other member states who want to tap into the pool of money for security efforts. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins reports from Brussels.
Poland currently has no appetite to use EU cohesion funds to bolster its military capabilities. Now, the country's funding official, Katarzyna Pałczyńska-Nałęcz, told reporters in the Belgian capital on Friday ahead of a General Affairs Council focusing on cohesion that she instead wants to use money allocated as part of the Recovery and Resilience Fund. Now, this is a program intended to ensure that countries are ready for whatever threat comes their way. She said that she wanted to use cohesion funds for their original purposes, such as developing infrastructure like roads and ports. Let's take a listen to what that official had to say.
We believe that cohesion funds should be preliminary dedicated to cohesion, to the development of Polish regions, while the RRF, this new fund, we can use for strengthening defense industry, for dual-use investments and for investments into the critical infrastructure.
Now, these comments run in stark contrast to some other rhetoric that we heard in the Belgian capital on Friday, particularly comments from Finland's EU Affairs Minister, Hakim Strand. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Finland has a border of 1,340 kilometers with Russia, so when it comes to that, we need also to have some kind of special financing tool, not only from a cohesion perspective, but also more from a comprehensive security perspective.
Cohesion funds have become a bit of a hot topic in Brussels as the European Commission flagged that it would allow member states to apply for the pot of cash to bolster their military capabilities as part of the Rearm Europe plan. However, it is not totally greenlit just yet, as it requires member states to litigate it further at their own parliaments. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
We're not only talking about supporting Polish companies and creating space for their activity in Ukraine, we're giving concrete solutions. That was the announcement and the message today from Poland's Minister of Development Funds and Regional Policy as they got the ball rolling on a business project designed to support the reconstruction of Ukraine. Konrad Golinski has more.
Finally, something tangible for Polish entrepreneurs. A Deputy Minister of Funds and Regional Policy, Jan Szyszko, hosted a number of officials Friday to launch a new support facility for companies interested in doing business with and participating in the reconstruction of Ukraine.
Today, we're not just talking about supporting Polish companies and creating opportunities for them to operate in Ukraine. We are providing specific tools and solutions.
Along with the Ministry of Economic Development and Technology and the Polish Development Bank, the BGK, and its partners, they've allocated about 250 million zloty, or 60 million euro, worth of preferential loans targeting small and medium-sized businesses that would like to expand to Ukraine. Now, new arrivals to the Ukrainian market will get a 10-year loan for 2% interest, while those with experience could count on a rate as low as 1%. The maximum amount of the loan will be 10 million zloty. TVP World spoke to the Polish Deputy Minister of Funds and Regional Policy, Jan Szyszko.
We want to promote the investments and economic activity of Polish firms in Ukraine. We know that many of them want to, but haven't had the sort of market backstops or market guarantees to invest in Ukraine right now.
Operating in Ukraine carries with it a lot of risk. For this reason, most banks shy away from lending funds for that purpose. So this facility is a good step. But 250 million zloty. That's not that much in the grand scheme of things. We asked the minister if we could count on more.
This all depends on the demand that we will have declaratively. So far, we hear that many SMEs in Poland would be interested. If that will really be the case, we are ready to make that budget larger. 250 is there in the basket. If there's interest, there's going to be more.
That's very positive news, but the question of where it'll come from remains. This current basket is financed by reallocating European funds that were not put to use in the previous budget. Now, with much more funding on its way from the EU this year, this amount could realistically grow. For TVP World, Konrad Gorlinski.
The prestigious Time magazine has recommended Warsaw's Museum of Modern Art in its top 100 places worth visiting in 2025. As Piotr Miszczuk reports, the outlet commended the museum for both its interior and exterior design.
We are at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, a place which was recently opened in October 2024. And the museum has already been named among 100 world's greatest places to visit in 2025 by the Time magazine. The magazine wrote about the museum perched near the hulking Palace of Culture and Science. The stark simplicity of the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw belies its power, but the true gems are hidden inside the museum, according to Józefina Bartyzel of the Communications Department of the museum.
We are now inviting everyone to visit the exhibition of a collection, a major show we've been waiting for the last 19 years, that consists of over 150 objects from a much bigger collection. We are actually focusing on artworks from the post-Cold War era to modern times, both Polish and international ones, from the avant-garde through the amazing critical art of the 90s up to very up-to-date video art. Everyone is welcome.
The mention by the Time magazine is very prestigious for the museum, as only 11 places in Europe have been put on that list. Other names include the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Nuuk International Airport in Greenland, and Parsnus. This is a Lithuanian Michelin-starred restaurant in the capital, Vilnius. For TVP World, from the Modern Art Museum in Warsaw, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
As Donald Trump's hard and fast push for peace in Ukraine continues, so too does his ambition to strike a minerals deal with the war-torn country. But President Trump wants it on his terms, with indications that America's latest offer demands access to all of Ukraine's natural resources for a number of years. Here to break down this developing story is Ioana Popescu, Director of the Global Focus Centre. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
So the US wants to come back to the minerals deal table with new and expanded terms that seem largely unfavourable to Ukraine. Is this the Trump White House effectively holding Kyiv to ransom?
That's a good question, because the terms of this new agreement seem designed in such a way that the Ukrainians cannot possibly accept them. So I think we need to ask ourselves whether this is genuinely Trump's approach, extremely transactional, as we have become accustomed already, in the sense of getting a lot in return for whatever American support there is, or this is another negotiation tactic that's meant to drive the Ukrainians to reject the terms of this new agreement as well. With what purpose, that's very hard to guess. I mean, either to then say that the Americans have presented countless offers and President Zelensky has refused all of them, and then the Americans need to come in and kind of craft the peace in their own terms and negotiate directly with the Russians without Kiev, or maybe it's genuinely a very Trumpian business-like approach where Donald Trump seeks to control a large part of Ukraine's oil and gas resources, rare earths, minerals, in a way that it would make Ukraine an extension of the United States.
We're hearing that this latest proposal would require Kyiv to send Washington profits from a fund controlling Ukrainian resources until Ukraine had repaid all American wartime aid plus interest. You mentioned there that Ukraine can't really possibly accept something like this. And I've seen some commentary today that this proposal, as it stands, is like putting a gun to Volodymyr Zelensky's head. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm not mistaken, President Zelensky has already said that if these are indeed the terms, and he kind of said that he wouldn't make full comments on the proposal as is, but would consult with top lawyers first. But he did say that if the agreement amounted to essentially recognizing even past American aid as a loan, that he wouldn't do that. And I think it makes sense, not just in terms of the burden that would put on Ukraine in the future, but it will also make sense from the point of view of not even international law, just commercial law, where you cannot place new conditions on something that's already happened. So yeah, indeed, but that's not something to be surprised by, Trump's approach. I just think, what is everybody's best guess is what the final goal is, and what Trump really seeks to accomplish with this.
If we take a bird's eye view on this, and as you mentioned, what it is that Trump really wants to accomplish here, we think back to his falling out with Zelensky. Do you get a sense that this was almost always the plan? Go back and forth, paint Ukraine as the bad guy, and ultimately try and strong-arm Zelensky into some sort of an agreement?
Yeah, this is one very possible scenario. The thing that's perhaps being less discussed is that this cannot happen without Europe. I mean, essentially, we're discussing the resumption of oil and gas flows to Europe via Ukraine from Russia, but Europe is an essential part of this. It's an essential part of this because it's the ultimate beneficiary of the oil and gas transit. It's a part of this because accepting the deal, again, as President Zelensky has already acknowledged, would equal Ukraine's impossibility to ever become a member of the European Union. It effectively bans Ukraine from ever selling to Europe in perhaps better conditions. So Europe is essentially a part of this, and it still remains to be seen if Donald Trump hopes that once the Ukrainians are strong-armed into accepting the terms of the deal, then he can do the same with Europe, because he would still need to get European cooperation. How that would happen is under a big question mark, because Ukraine is in a very tight spot here. So we could imagine a scenario where they would really be forced to accept whatever terms Washington presents, but that's not the same for Europe. So I think the next question is, how does Donald Trump expect to negotiate these terms with Europe? Why would Europe accept? Are there any plans to perhaps also strong-arm Europe in ways that we haven't anticipated yet? Maybe against the threat of a U.S. withdrawal from Europe, military withdrawal, or drawing down significantly on U.S. capabilities, or perhaps refusing to comply with the terms of the NATO Article 5, or anything of the sort. I mean, really, I think we really need to wonder if Europe is such an integral part of the deal. We can see Trump's attempt to strong-arm the Ukrainians. How is he going to try to strong-arm the Europeans?
Speaking of Europe, we've seen leaders descend on Paris again this week. Again, there were many points made about this so-called coalition of the willing. There was some talk of a reassurance force that could support Ukraine away from the front line. But are these talks a step in the right direction, or are they just that, talk?
I don't think they're just talk. I think clearly, just like during the pandemic, I think the EU has been moving forward at a speed that it hasn't really experienced over the past decades. It's still very slow as compared to the challenges at hand. So, hence your and my frustration and everybody's, but I do think that it is moving in the right direction, and it's perhaps moving more strategically than it has done in the past. it's good that we're talking about a reassurance force. It's no longer mentioned as a peacekeeping force or something similar, which has been discussed quite extensively in some media, and I think this was misplaced. So it's good that we're talking now about something much more comprehensive, where we still don't have the concrete elements, and it remains unclear how that would happen. And then, you know, the mandate of this force would very much depend on the European involvement in the stabilization of the situation in Ukraine. But the simple fact that European leaders are coming together, they're willing to commit more resources, they're willing to work together more, places at least constraints on the ability of Washington to negotiate with Moscow over Kiev's head and ignoring everybody else. So I think the most important thing still is that at least Europe is a significant element in the whole negotiation, and it cannot just be bypassed at this point.
Ioana Popescu, Director of the Global Focus Centre, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
And that's World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman, and I'll be back just after a short break with Face to Face.